All right, for those of you who are dialing in, we are welcome everybody for joining us at Founders Hong Kong. We're going to just 30 seconds for everybody to jump in, and then I'm going to do a quick intro of Peter. I'm so excited to have Peter with us today. So for those of you dialing in, just a reminder, so Founders Hong Kong, we're a nonprofit organization with the mission to connect founders, investors, operators with Hong Kong founders and all the amazing investors from around the world. Our goal is really to help and support this Hong Kong startup ecosystem and founder community. For those of you dialing in now, I do want to do a little bit quick plug. In addition to our session today, we have another really awesome event that is coming up. Okay, coming up and when? Well, coming up on February 18th, we're going to have a product focus session with GoGo Van, which is just renamed GoGo X, and their head of product, Vincent, to talk about product management. So with that, I'm going to actually start my video and I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to welcome Peter to join us. So for those of you dialing in, thank you for being with us today. Peter, if you want to turn on your camera, let's get started. So what I'm going to do in the next hour or so, I am known always to be on time with everything. So I'm going to quickly have a conversation with Peter, and then we will probably for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll leave the rest for opportunity for the audience to participate, to ask us questions. But Peter, I'm so excited to have you, and I really didn't realize we almost know each other for over almost 10 years. And
yeah, almost 10, yeah.
And it's crazy. Like I guess like the first time we met was actually in China, and so that's definitely like even before. Definitely before Race, definitely before even 500. So I was working on Dolphin Browser and you were with AWS at the time, right?
Yeah, correct, with Amazon, yes.
That's awesome. But yeah, so maybe we can start this conversation. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about Southeast Asia investment landscape and all this stuff. Let's start with actually, I really want to let the audience just learn more about you, sort of your background, your story, and why in the world are you in Singapore? And how did you get started?
Yeah, no, sure. Happy to talk about that. And it's interesting if I go back that first time we met in Beijing and then later in Singapore, and we'll talk about that maybe in a second. But like as my accent, I'm sure gives away, I'm actually from the Netherlands, from Amsterdam. When I was a student, I actually did an internship in Japan. Loved it, fell in love with Japan, started traveling a lot there and in the rest of Asia. And so when I started working, the first thing I wanted to do was like get out of Europe as soon as I can and actually move to Asia. And that was already with technology companies. And long story short, at some stage, during my college years, I'd also done a startup myself. And then one of my first jobs was actually with a kind of like an incubator, but different than the way we know it. It was actually more of a conglomerate that was developing all sorts of different product and retail franchise concepts, etc. And so I've always been kind of like on that edge of entrepreneurship and technology. And then at some stage I ended up in Amazon, where AWS was just getting started, right? And it was, again, that was about 10 years ago. And I was employee number 12 or 13 in Asia. It was super, super small still. Like right now there's thousands. But interesting enough, I was also the first employee in a new team that they set up only 2 months prior, which was the first time they'd actually set up a team that was focused on the venture capital industry and on the startup industry. And they had just hired 2 guys in the US, and that's it. There was no one else. That team wasn't there. We didn't know what we're going to do, how we were going to do it. The only premise was like, hey, a lot of startups actually run on AWS. It is very hard to find them and to engage them at scale. Who are the folks that bring these startups together? And so you can engage at scale, one. How do you focus how can you make sure that you focus on the right startups, i.e. the ones that are curated, that are the good ones? Now, we realized that we were not the right folks to know which one was good or not. But we knew that there was a group of people or entities that did that for a living, right? Finding whether a startup was good or not. And those were the venture capital companies. And so we started focusing on that. And in that capacity, I basically set up, I basically was responsible for the startup business and revenue in AWS in a way, and focused on building relationships with a lot of the leading venture capital firms. And like right now, that team in AWS itself is hundreds of people. And I think just in Asia, there's like, 60, 70, 80 or not. Back then, I was covering all of Asia, including India, Australia, and China, except for Japan. And in that capacity, I did regular trips to Shanghai and Beijing, meeting there with the various venture firms and see how we could leverage them. Now, obviously, with AWS not really truly being in China, it was very much a more limited conversation about helping those companies in their portfolios be successful outside of China and leveraging AWS over there. And on one of those trips, there were various folks, and I think some folks from Dolphin Browser were there as well. Basically, to cut it short, I then, in Southeast Asia, where I was based in Singapore, I was working very closely with a lot of the leading VCs in Southeast Asia, as well as India. And one of the ones that I worked very closely with was Sequoia. And at some stage, what started to happen in Sequoia was that they, actually two kind of like dynamics started to collide a bit, right? On the one hand, they were starting to build out a team of specialists, of experts, we call it portfolio services, that were focused on technology or marketing or sales or whatever, helping portfolio companies be more successful and scale faster. At the same time, many of the Sequoia India portfolio companies, but actually also some from the US like Dropbox and Airbnb, started to expand in Asia, often with Singapore as a hub, right? And so in a way, we helped about 25, 30 different companies from Sequoia India re-domicile to Singapore, for obvious reasons, right? Whether it's IP or tax or like just overall stability, etc. And we had initially thought those would be like so-called PO box like companies, right? They would just have an incorporation there, but that's it. But the reality was different, right? Many folks started to move there, CEOs like founders. Many of them started building up larger teams or growing their revenue significantly in Southeast Asia. So then Sequoia was like, oh, hold on. We have like 30 companies in our portfolio that are like have a serious presence in Singapore. We have all these capabilities back in India. Like, how do we balance that? And so what they did is they hired someone on the ground to actually, in the first instance, not to invest, but to support the portfolio companies. Right. And liaison in a way back to kind of like those capabilities back in India. But then what happened was that through those companies and with those companies, and just by taking a lot of meetings with founders, I think they started learning more about Southeast Asia and actually met a lot of really interesting companies and met a lot of amazing founders. So much so that in April 2014, when Sequoia India raised Sequoia India 4, the fourth fund, that was for the first time an India and Southeast Asia fund. So Southeast Asia became part of the mandate from the limited partners, and we were allowed to and supposed to invest a certain portion of that fund in Southeast Asian companies. So obviously, then they needed to build up the team, and I've been working closely with them for a long time. I've been like sharing a lot of deal flow over the years with them already, and so they asked me to join, which I did towards the end of 2014. So that's over 6 years ago, and I've been with Sequoia since then, focused on Southeast Asia and building up the team. Our first little office, which was like, it was almost like a nightclub. It was like dark and black walls, and it was like really bad. It was a co-working space, right? And we had this tiny little room. And from there, like right now, we have a full office. We have like 30, 35 people. Not all of them purely focused on Southeast Asia. There's a couple of teams that focus like Southeast Asia and India as well. It's become a serious proper office.
Yeah. So I cannot believe it's been 6 years. I think the minute you joined, I remember your first office was like this beautiful office in a high rise. I'm like, wow, it's completely grown up now. But so now like you've been with Sequoia Southeast in Singapore for 6 years now. What is your team focus like in terms of stage, geography? Southeast Asia means there's so many countries in Southeast Asia. What does that really mean? I'd love to learn more in terms of your focus in investments.
I think first of all, Sequoia has always been kind of like full stack. We've always said, and our mantra is almost like from idea to IPO and beyond, right? And so we've always focused on seed, venture, which is kind of like Series A, B, and then growth. And we now also have a global growth fund that can do $100 million rounds, $200 million rounds. So it's really full stack across the various stages of company design, company building, growth, scaling, et cetera, et cetera. I think what's interesting is that, and maybe we can chat about that later, but like we have always done seed. Like Dropbox was a seed in the US, Airbnb was seed. Here in Southeast Asia, there's various companies like Zalingo where we did the seed, or Fave where we did the seed. But very often those seeds were less known, right? Because when there's another round in Gojek, they're like, everyone's like, oh, Sequoia did the Series A there, and or Tokopedia or others, etc. But the seeds, like, or they don't announce at all, or they there's news but no one picks it up because the name of the company is not known yet, right? And so people started to think that Sequoia was not doing seeds. And obviously, like, other investors in the ecosystem was like, no, like let us do the seed, then we'll get you ready to speak with Sequoia. That kind of a conversation, which was funny. And so we started to focus a bit more openly on that, and we set up something called Surge about 1.5 years ago, which is like a seed fund, but with a whole program around it, focused on capital and lots of content and workshops and international exposure and founder community, etc. So stage-wise, it's very broad. I think sector-wise, again, like, it is obviously primarily technology focused, right? And Don Valentine, the late founder of Sequoia, like, was always focused on like technology companies that can become enduring company, that can stand the test of time. Hence the name as well, by the way. He didn't call it Valentine Ventures, which he could have done with such a name. But Sequoia as a tree, as a symbol of something that gets really, really big, really, really strong, but frankly also takes time to build, right? It takes time to grow muscles, to grow roots. And so our style of investing from that point of view is very much focused on that, like what we call company building. And so very, very hands-on, and Search is that, but even our venture and growth teams are super, super hands-on, helping companies to build those roots and hopefully to become large. So from a sector point of view, it's very much technology focused. So you can think about anything that is consumer and mobile internet, fintech, and then enterprise software. Those are obviously the big buckets. But within that, whether it's healthcare or whether it's property, there could be all sorts of sectors, etc. Now, the reality is what you see in emerging markets very often, and you see that in India, and you saw that in the early days in China, and in Southeast Asia as well. A lot of the growth is actually driven by the growth in disposable income. So it's very much consumer-led, right? And so initially, specifically, the majority of the portfolio here was consumer companies and consumer internet. But it's starting to change a bit. Why it's harder to sometimes change is, if you want to build enterprise companies, if you want to build deep tech, you need like strong engineering, right?
Yeah.
So if you look in our US portfolio, it's maybe half, lots of strong engineers. If you look at India, you also have that dynamic of an increase in disposable income, so that pull from the market, from the consumer side, but phenomenal IITs, the Indian the Institutes of Technologies there, lots of strong engineers, more and more enterprise as well. At least more than here, less than in the US. Lately, it starts to change a bit. We're seeing more and more strong tech teams, sometimes like homegrown, sometimes folks that have moved to the region. But there is a bit more pickup of enterprise, and we're seeing more and more software as a service companies. And frankly, even those have different formats. Some of them are actually SaaS companies that are like enablers to the e-commerce boom, and as a result, still driven by consumer demand. Some of them are more like prosumer, et cetera, et cetera. And so different type of companies, but that is how it's evolving a bit. But we're quite broad in the investment focus. If you think about geographies, I think it's starting to change a bit. Like Singapore is obviously a hub, right? I'm not sure how many of you are experienced with the US ecosystem, but like most companies actually incorporate in Delaware, right? But yeah. they raise funding in Menlo Park, where a lot of in the Bay Area, where a lot of the funding is. For Southeast Asia, Singapore is both Menlo Park and Delaware, right? Companies incorporate here, right? I meet a company in Vietnam, even before we talk about like incorporation, they're like, yeah, we're in Singapore, right? And the funding is largely here as well. And obviously now more like domestic homegrown funds are starting to come up, but for the longest time it was very much Singapore centric. Now the drawback is Singapore obviously has a super small domestic market, right? So you can't really build a very, very large company just being in Singapore. So the thesis for the longest time has been like, if you're in Singapore and any of the other markets, you have to be either regional or global. Except for maybe Indonesia. If you're domestic there, if you're Tokopedia or if you're Gojek, and if you're in the right market segment, in the right neighborhood, you can still become a very, very large company just in Indonesia.
Yeah.
That's for the longest time how we felt. That's still largely the case, but we're starting to take a 10-year view, right? Venture capital is a long-term business, right? Take a long-term view. Markets like Thailand, like Vietnam, like Philippines, where GDP per capita is already higher, sometimes 2x what it is in Indonesia, where they don't have 250 million-ish people, but maybe 70 or 80 million. I think 10 years out, those economies will become very large. Yep. And so we started making some early seed bets in some domestic companies, for example, in Vietnam, where we've done too, where those companies actually do not have from the get-go a regional focus or a regional plan, but where they go for a market segment that we think in 5 years' time or whatever can actually generate large companies. So that's how things are slightly changing.
I see. So these days, like, by the way, just to put things into perspective, there's the combined population of Southeast Asia is 670 some million. That's doubles the size of the U.S. So. And then at the same time, there's so many different countries, and you mentioned Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia. So I guess also like in terms of valuation these days is actually quite diverse. Like in terms of what are some of what you see in terms of range of valuation these days for a seed stage company?
Listen, frankly, I don't think valuation across these countries changes a lot because it's the same investors, it's the same supply demand curve, so to speak. Right? Different than the US, different than China. Like frothiness specifically in SaaS right now in the US is insane. Like multiples are through the roof. Here they're still more sane. The friction start becoming when supply of startups starts start interjecting with different demand curves for that startup's equity. And when they start speaking with the US, then they say like, hey, in the US I get 30x multiple. Here I get a 10x multiple. What do we do? But in Southeast Asia, I don't see the valuations very different. But like, listen, in valuation, you think about not just traction of the company and founder quality, but you'd also think about market potential. And that's not a yes or a no. It's not a binary. It's not quantitative. But companies that have an unbounded market opportunity, tend to be able to raise at higher multiples, although it's very subjective and very subtle. And so if you're in Indonesia and your domestic market is Indonesia, you have a natural advantage over someone maybe in Vietnam or in Malaysia or in Singapore for sure, right? So that plays into it, but in a very nuanced way. In general, the valuations are somewhat homogeneous across the region. I think what's more interesting or sometimes challenging is, and back to that fragmentation that you're talking about, is imagine I do really well in one country, and I want to go regional. Guess what? What I'm doing, let's say I'm doing something in property in Singapore. Yeah. Well, there's a similar type company in Thailand, in Malaysia, in Philippines, et cetera, et cetera. So either I need to outcompete them on their home turf, or I need to somehow get so big in my market that I can acquire that I can kind of like build up the size and skill to raise larger amounts and to then acquire these companies and roll up, et cetera. But both are tough, and not many people have pulled them off. And that's a challenge with that fragmentation. Like user needs, user requirements, behaviors, etc., are different across these markets, and regulations are different. So if you are in property or you are in healthcare, it's not easy to expand. And then like specifically if you're in Singapore and you start here, some people said, oh, it's a nice small market, and then I go to the other markets. But Singapore is a very developed economy with a very high GDP per capita, has very different characteristics and user behavior as all the countries around it. So normally it's like, if you're in one, whatever, European market, it's very logical to jump to the next European market because they're somewhat similar. There's obviously many differences as well. But here, those differences are even starker, right? So
So I guess you probably get that asked quite a bit. And, in Hong Kong, there are a lot of Hong Kong entrepreneurs super interested in expanding south, right? So common thing is Singapore, Taiwan. That's like usually the first couple of places they think about more or less similarity in terms of GDP plus behavior. But let's say beyond this, like, those are smaller cities and countries. How should I think about it? Obviously, there's no right or wrong answer. But let's say healthcare, right? I forgot if you invested in Pronetics or not, but let's say Pronetics more like.
I know them a bit. The founder is an angel in one of our companies and a good friend of the founder of Fave. So I've hung out with him a bit in Hong Kong here and there.
Yeah, Danny is great. So in this case, like how would your framework and thinking about all this?
Listen, I can't comment for him specifically, but in healthcare specifically, like for example, we're in a healthcare business in Australia and one in India that have some similarities, right? The one in India realized that no doctor there, no clinic had a practice management system. So they could start out building a practice management system and from the back started to move towards the consumer. The Australian company realized that 99% of the clinics had a practice management system, so they couldn't touch that. So they needed to start with the customer and then gradually do a bit more and get closer to it. So the whole movement of product development, of roadmap, whereas the gap is different. Then regulations are different, like insurance, like is there, are certain things covered or not? What does that mean for user behavior? If it's covered, people automatically go to the doctor a lot more because they don't think about it. If it costs you money, in some markets it's normal to make an appointment. In Indonesia, you can't make an appointment. You just go there and you wait for 3 hours, sometimes 4 hours, sometimes in India as well. And so there's lots of these differences in behavior, in the system, in the structure, and that makes it harder. Now, that's not true for everything, by the way. Like if you are, whatever, selling, server management, whatever, like B2B, yes, there will be some nuances and changes in willingness to pay or behavior or approach or players, but largely there will be more similarities in user behavior. It won't be as cultural specific, regulation specific, etc. So it really depends on the market that you're in as well.
Got it. I have a few things. Just pretend I'm the founder. I just want to get a better sense that you do all different stage seed. Do you guys usually prefer lead to lead?
Yes.
Okay.
A lot of folks in Southeast Asia that are more like we follow. And for us, it's high conviction investing. Like either we don't build conviction, we don't invest, we don't join party rounds, we don't dip in our toes normally. It's like either we don't or we do. And if we do, we go all in normally. And we want to give you what we call the full Sequoia embrace. So all those portfolio services and experts we want to bring to the table, we want to help you. That doesn't make sense if you own 2 or 3% here or there by dipping your toe in. It's like high conviction, go for it.
And do you prefer to take board seats?
Yes, like normally, like listen, when you get like 15, 20, 25% ownership in Series A or B, you do. In seed, we don't by design, but then when in some of those companies, we obviously follow on more aggressively, and then we do. But at seed, we have like a very simple one-page term sheet, very very simple, fast, founder-friendly, no board seat.
Got it. And then let's say if well, by the way, sometimes like Series A, B, C is also. These days there's so many different terms for it. But let's say if I already raised A and I'm raising B or C, should I contact you?
Yes, you should contact Sequoia for sure.
Again,
geographic specific. Like we work India, Southeast Asia. Our focus is on here for the team here is on Southeast Asia. Like the reality is boundaries are blurring, right? So sometimes there's companies that have a founder in Australia, but the market is the US, and they're building up the team here, or they're in Hong Kong, but the majority of their customers are in India and Southeast Asia, et cetera, et cetera. So reactively, we've done some stuff in Taiwan or Hong Kong or Australia or Korea or whatever, but that's maybe 5% of the portfolio. Like our proactive focus is on Southeast Asia.
Okay, so how does your investment decision process look like?
It differs across stages. For seed, it's obviously much faster and more nimble. For venture, you want to do, and growth, you want to do a bit more analysis and a bit more depth and rigor in your analysis. But when you say investment process, what do you mean specifically? Like how we decide, or how we evaluate, or how we do diligence, or?
Yeah, so I guess especially which is a deeper question I want to ask. Like these days, oh my God, like I basically on Zoom like 12 hours a day, and like Peter, I'm in San Francisco now, but I can't wait to come and visit you again in Singapore. But it will be a while for any of the Vietnamese or Thai entrepreneur be able to meet you in person. So
Yeah.
how should I pitch you over Zoom? Like we're going to be continue to be like this. So do I have to like pitch to you and then to a whole group of people?
Weird, right? There's founders right now in Singapore that I'm able to meet, and like we've just signed a term sheet with the company after many meetings. Frankly, I can't even remember whether I've met him in person already. I don't know. I know his face, I see his face, but I don't know if I've seen. On Thursday, I have a dinner with a founder that we've backed 6 months ago. And one founder is in Vietnam, one is here. And he was like, we should meet up. I'm like, of course we should meet up. Why haven't we met up? Like we got so used to do everything on Zoom that it almost doesn't matter anymore. But the reality is it still does to some extent, right? But if you ask me, how do you pitch on Zoom? Like, listen, the reality is we don't look for different things, right? The only thing is, you know, it's harder to do the small talk. Normally you walk into a room, you have some small talk, you pour a drink, blah, 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 before you get started. And so that aspect is a bit different. So the building connect at the personal level, the chit chat isn't there as much. And that's sometimes tough. And you know, as a result, we're obviously trying, like in our meetings as well, to be more easygoing. And it's not like open your window, okay, hello, yes, please open your deck, and we sit there. By the way, we don't do that in person. We don't do that on Zoom either. But the main hallmarks of a good pitch meeting are still the same, right? It's still about clarity of thinking and how you lay out, and like not much different from that point of view.
Yeah, makes sense. And then on this note, right? So you mentioned that you invested in a founder, which is one in Vietnam and one in Singapore. Do you think, even let's say COVID is going to be over, what do you think about this whole concept of distributed teams? Do you think it's here to stay?
Yeah, I think it's here to stay for sure. I think there's a lot of nuances that people overlook, right? I think in the past, like the larger startups already had some folks here and then an engineering hub in India and folks there, et cetera. Is that just an international organization, or is that a distributed team? Can you say that somewhere is the HQ? Is there a hub somewhere? I think more and more you see teams that you ask them where they're based and they have no answer, right? And they're completely distributed. And there might be one guy here, two guys there. I think that is merit, but one of the things I focus on a lot in the startups I work with is the importance of culture and having a very, very strong culture. When I worked in Amazon, it was amazing how strong that culture was and how little process and procedures and rules we needed, because people had these leadership principles, 14 in all back then, that were such a strong mental and moral compass, helping you to make decisions in the absence of leadership, in the absence of guidance, in the absence of process, because you knew what good looked like. Establishing that and then embedding that deeply into an organization and into how people behave, and course correcting and assimilating to the culture of others becomes quite hard if you're 100% distributed. So unless you solve for that consciously, normally some of that goes subconsciously, right? You're sitting in an office together, water cooler chat, combined with some more conscious focus on that. But as soon as you start going completely distributed, you have to manage for that. And that's not always easy. So is it here to stay? Yes. Is it generally a good thing? Yes, but there are some caveats that you should watch out for.
Got it. Super rapid fire. You don't have to go into detail. If you would have to pick one, which one is your favorite portfolio company?
Which one is my favorite kid? I won't answer that one.
Oh man. Okay. How about if you have to pick one company that you didn't invest but you wish you did?
It is like the largest market cap company in Southeast Asia right now is C, right? Garena. And it was before I was with Sequoia, but in hindsight, like that's the largest market cap company here now. So that would have been nice to start with.
Who's your favorite founder of CEO of all time?
I still admire Jeff Bezos a lot.
Yeah, he's amazing. How about favorite investor of all time?
Mike Moritz. In Sequoia, obviously.
Uh,
Let me explain why. I know it's rapid fire, but I think this is important. I had conversations with Sir Michael about this, and he refers to it as dream gene, right? At whatever stage, you think it's only at seed, but it's across all stages. You have to be able to, have the analytical rigor, the depth, the understanding, asking the first order questions, etc. But you also have to be able to dream. And this part is tough, but you can learn and people can do it. But the ability to put yourself in the shoes of a founder and have that dream gene and dream with that founder about what the company can become is super, super hard. And so balancing those two out, there's very few people that can do that well. And for me, he's a prime example of that.
Yeah, and for the rest of the audience, I'm getting like various different questions from chat and from Q&A. We're going to start an open Q&A, and I'm going to bring some of you to video so Peter get to see you as well, and face to face in person in 5 minutes. But yeah, I watch a lot of Michael's, more than live video. He's definitely very, very impressive and thought-provoking. And super rapid fire. What's your favorite startup event? You can say this one.
Favorite startup event. I did too much events right now. I'm not sad they're over. But back in the days, the Tech in Asia events in Southeast Asia were the largest ones, and it was always good. And then Rise in Hong Kong was good because it was Southeast Asia plus a lot of other regions coming together in Hong Kong. So that was very good also.
Awesome. And then what's your go-to tech media that you do read every day?
It's still TechCrunch and Tech in Asia here.
Okay, awesome. Cool. So what I'm going to do for everyone, a few logistic, because I do this every time because it's really about building community. That's why I'm going to bring you up on video. And I know like there are some of you really wanted to pitch Peter, but this is a forum for everybody. So I don't want to have to stop you. So make specific question, and you can obviously talk a little bit about what you do, but the focus is really for the community. So no hard pitching, please. So I'm going to actually quickly bring on Arnold. So give me 1 second. Just bear with me. We will make this super fun. Arnold, I just promote you to panelists, and you can show your video if you want. Actually, please show your video if you can. Hey, you.
Hey guys, how are you? Quick question for Peter. What is your favorite way to source stealth startups, or Gmail startup, or the bootstrapped one, the one that haven't raised yet and are really flying under the radar?
Those are still all word of mouth, frankly. Like sometimes they reach out to me directly, but normally it is another founder that'll say like, hey, this buddy of mine, he used to be here or used to be there. He's starting to think about something, like, you mind grabbing a coffee and brainstorm with him? So, and that's it. Like, there's always this discussion about like, does it work cold? One of our search companies right now just reached out to me cold, and that worked in that case. But you know, making sure that you can, like, there's people that say like, oh yeah, but we don't have access to VCs right now with LinkedIn, etc. If you can't hustle your way into an investor, then can you hustle later for customers, for partners, for employees, etc. Right? So it's a bit of a signal, so to speak.
So it's for you to be visible, to have them to reach out to you later.
Sorry?
So it's mostly for you to be visible first, to speak at conference, to do that work, for them to have them to find you.
Work, right? Yeah, of course, I need to do my work, and I need to be visible, and not just visible, but accessible. Like, some people are visible, but you don't dare reaching out to them, right? And so it's that combination of being visible, but also being approachable and just being a nice person, hopefully, right?
Yeah. And I know like there's some investor in the room as well, and sometimes, you know, Peter, particularly like when we first met you from AWS. So in my head is always, oh, enterprise. Infrastructure software, I should definitely talk to you. Not even for investment per se, but definitely I think a lot of investors build their own persona in terms of certain vertical and sector that you focus on. So that's helpful to do, to build your own brand as an investor.
Yeah, like, listen, the reality is, specifically in Southeast Asia, the market is not deep enough to just be focused on one thing. In the US, you could do that. But even if you look at our team in the US, some folks are very, very specific, but many of them, if you look at Rule of Bota in our team over there, and Edith, you know him well, like, he's he led the YouTube investment and Evernote and EventWise, which is all like consumer internet, but then also Unity, which listed last year, which is gaming, and 123andMe in the genome space, and MongoDB, which is database, like many different things. And so what you see here as well is there's this T profile, like we have to go wide, all of us, but some folks have a bit more fintech experience, and sometimes it's random, right? Like one guy in our team led a logistics deal, and then another logistics deal came to the table, and he was like, let me look at it because I've done that one. He's done 3 now, and he's become the expert in that within our team, right? And that's the way it works. It's okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Arnold, for your question. Bye-bye. I'm going to promote Miranda. How do I? Hey, Miranda. Hello. We cannot see you. Please join us from the black hole. Hello.
That's Miranda Tang.
Hi, yes, I just speak Cantonese to you. Miranda is while she's trying to figure it out, her question is, you mentioned from idea to IPO to assist portfolio. Oh, Miranda, we found you.
Still on mute, though. Miranda, you have to unmute. We can't hear you. We can see you, but you're still on mute.
Ah, there you go.
Awesome.
Yes. Good morning. Thanks for the great sharing. I'm a private equity investor myself for over 20 years. I'm always perplexed about, startups, and currently my job have been advising and coaching some of the startups. So just want to hear from you. You just now you mentioned, from ideas, to IPO. I'm just curious to know, how are you going to structure the team if that's the case? Because, I understand from, different stages of companies would require different assets to help them to scale up and grow. So just want to hear from your setup.
Yeah, sure. And frankly, I think it's a very good question, and it's not easy, right? The key thing for an investor is obviously, and you hear that a lot, is like pattern recognition, right? What do you learn from, like, if I look at 10 SaaS companies and I meet SaaS company number 11, and it might be in a different space. It might be a market, let's say it's in construction for like whatever, right? I might not know construction very well, but I know what signs of customer love look like. And I know what good metrics look like. And I know when gross margin isn't high, what are the natural causes of that? And how can we look into that? What can we control, et cetera? So it's always about trying to look for the areas that you can add value. Like I remember I was driving for Sequoia here in the region, the Series A in a company called Funding Societies, which was peer-to-peer lending. Regulated industry, very specific risk models, risk loan acceptance criteria, whatever, lots of detail around that. And I had a very, very frank discussion with the founder when we started. I said, listen, the specifics, the domain expertise, I don't have it yet. And so I'm going to focus my value add on our conversations on helping to coach you, helping to look at how we communicate with investors, how to build a team. And so I focused a lot on those things. And then over the time working with him, I learned more about that. And I started obviously educating myself. And gradually I could add a bit more value in those areas. But the reality is the founder is also smart enough to say, hey, this is where Pieter is good and I'm going to help him. And then he got this advisor on board who worked with some of the large peer-to-peer lending companies in China, and he was a chief risk officer there, and he filled that gap with that. And so at some stage we had a board with different folks with different expertise. The benefit is I was with them really early. So for many tougher things, like I was the first port of call when there was bad news or when there was tough decisions to make, etc. But for specific domain expertise where I wasn't going to be the expert, he made sure he had others, right? And so, for me, try to add value from the strength and from the experience that you do have. Don't try and BS your way through the things that you don't know, but be honest about that and gradually learn.
Totally agree. Thanks.
Thank you.
Miranda.
Thanks, Edith.
I'm going to change your role, and then up next we're going to have okay, bear with me, Alexandru. Is that how you say your name? Okay, you have to say your name yourself. And the next question is about deep tech and what you think about research institute type What happened to Alexander?
Stage fright.
We lost him. Wait, did I remove? Okay, sorry. All right, actually, you know what? My bad. And I'm going to promote Jean. Okay, Jean, your turn.
Hey, Peter.
Hey, Gene, how's it going?
Good. Hey, it's been a while. Thanks so much for taking the time for the sharing. It's amazing. So quick to my question is that, well, you know, I'm in Hong Kong right now, and like in Asia, we talk about Southeast Asia. There's also North Asia, well, mainly Northeast Asia. So a lot of startups I've seen like in Northeast Asia taking an interest in Southeast Asia, and quite a number of them has expanded there. And this actually, it varies in industry. There's logistics, there's like travel, there's you know, even online e-commerce. And I'd like to get a better understanding, like what do you see potential advantages or disadvantages? Well, disadvantages, I think we know, but just advantages of you know, potentially North Asian startups going into Southeast Asian. And I would like maybe you if you know or see any trends of like, hey, or opportunities for these startups from North Asia going to Southeast Asia.
Yeah, sure. I think good question. And I think, listen, as I mentioned earlier, in general, it's very hard when you have so many different markets to be successful in one and then in the other as well. Like US is more movies. I guess even when you're within China, like it looks the same from the outside, but the difference between a tier 1 and a tier 3 city is huge. And the different provinces, etc., and user behaviors and whatnot. But at least you have, you know, somewhat, you know, one language-wise, currency-wise, etc. In these markets, it's different. So I think, first of all, it's always difficult. The second, as I mentioned earlier, you always have to compete with others who are potentially doing something similar in there, and they have their home turf advantage. Third, I think it should be very specific, right? The interesting things with Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan, which you mentioned in your question as kind of like North Asia.
And Korea for that matter. Yeah, Korea as well. Yeah.
But they're all developed markets, right? They're Asian countries, but they're economies with a high GDP per capita, with high like penetration of whether it's broadband or mobile phones, with higher standards of banking, etc. So if you would say, can they be successful in Singapore? I'd say yes, right? Because there's a similarity at the macroeconomic and behavioral level. There's a similarity. But if you say like, oh yeah, I've done well in Hong Kong, now I'm going into Indonesia, that's a whole different ballgame, right? And so in general, success in one market is not always a strong signal for success in another market. But the more different that second market is, the harder it becomes. And so when you phrase the question as, you know, to be successful in Southeast Asia, again, generally, it will be harder unless you obviously account for all those differences. And it obviously depends on your business model, to what extent it is, again, as I mentioned earlier, like highly regulated or not, or these things all come. So is it possible? Yeah, of course. Are there companies that have done it successful? Like, for example, there's some logistics companies from Hong Kong that have done well here in the region. But obviously not easy.
Yeah, and I guess maybe on the hiring as well. Yeah, it has to be very good.
Always, like team is always the number one thing, and that's the key thing as well. I've seen with one of my portfolio companies here, they're from Malaysia. You know, their Indonesia business has not performed as well, but Singapore has done extremely well. And one of the main reasons for that is they hired a guy to run Singapore who's like crushing it. Like, he's amazing, right?
Right.
That makes all the difference.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Hey, thanks.
Good to see you, Jean.
Hey, good to see you.
And then I'm going to bring back Alexander. Okay, give me 1 sec. Yeah, I think I remember, Peter, I think when you and I met the first time, we were at the time with Dolphin Browser, we're trying to hire a GM for Southeast Asia. It's not easy because you don't want to make your local head feel like second-class citizen, right? You obviously really need to understand sort of the local requirement, and your product may actually need to adapt to some of the local behavior, but there's always a gap in terms of communication. So sometimes you really need to send your product guy, maybe your engineer, to actually go with you to really understand what's going on before really like recruit the best people. Alexander, your turn. Apologize, I was having technical difficulties. Please go ahead.
No worries. Thanks. Hi, Edith. Hi, Peter. Thanks for sharing. So I'm Alex. I'm the founder of 3DK Tech. We do metal 3D printing. And so my question to you has to do with deep tech and IP for deep tech. So what are your thoughts usually on how deep tech's coming from research institute and they have non-exclusive licensing agreements for the technology, but with a roadmap to filing more patents and whatnot? From my discussions, like it's not really the best position to be in, but coming from a research institute that for which the technology was developed doing for research, it's kind of hard to just take it out without having a license agreement, understanding with the university or the research institute.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, thanks for the question. I think it's a very specific question, and I think what I see is that the standard venture investors are indeed not as keen or don't understand it as well. I think what you see in markets like the US or Israel for that matter, and I reckon in China as well, that there's more specialized investors that understand those models much better. They know that they take a science risk early on, and they're okay to invest. Like in the US, we have a couple of deep tech investments where like you can't report numbers for several years because there are no numbers. It's purely milestones based, right? And actually for Sequoia here, I led a seed in Singapore in a quantum computing company, and the founder came from academia, and moved out. And frankly, him moving out from a tenured professor position is a big sign already, right? And it's not like, oh, I'm going to dip my toe in it, I'm going to try. He went all out, or all in, I should say. But there was no IP issue over there. Again, the interesting thing is, as investors, we actually don't often talk that much about IP. So if you would have just said like, hey, I'm going from academia and I'm building this fantastic company, if you would not have brought up IP, like it would have been a less complicated, and maybe we wouldn't even ask for it, right? When there is an IP that is structured in such a way that it impacts your numbers, because for every unit sold, you have to give up X percentage of your revenue, then it becomes a business question, right? But the fact that over time you can build IP, and whether that IP is patented or not, but it's like, you know, some of the best IP, like I'm not sure if Airbnb has a lot of patents. They might have, but like, you know, the fact that I don't even know, or Dropbox for that matter, it means that it's not always the key thing to look at. In academia, they make you think it's the key thing to look at, but the reality in venture, it not always is. Again, unless it started having an impact on the economics, and you have to give up whatever 10% of every order to that, and your gross margin into eternity is impacted by that, then it becomes an issue. Cool. Hope that helps.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you for your questions. And, you know, on this note, sometimes, you know, it's always super interesting to look at, to have IPs, but at the end of the day, I think it's not technology that make the company win. It's really about, are you solving a real problem? What is your go-to-market? And okay, give me 1 second. I'm trying to multitask. And we have Valentine, and I hate to butcher her name, I apologize. And then of course, Alexander froze. So I'm sure that you guys like looking at my face, and my eyes is like everywhere because I'm literally looking at all your questions. I'm promoting you guys as panelists at the same time. So Valentine is going to come on in 30 seconds. On this note, you know, you used to work for AWS. Maybe we can chat about this offline on this whole Elasticsearch versus AWS battle that's going on. That's also super interesting as well. With open source, is even even harder in this case. But I'm gonna. How do I say your name correctly?
It's Valentine. Valentine, correct.
Welcome. Hey, Valentine. How are you?
Thanks, Edith, for joining me. Hey, Peter, thanks for the insight. So my question is, I work for a startup based in Hong Kong, and the question is quite straightforward. How do investors see Hong Kong currently? Is it still as an interesting destination for their money, or well, it's been viewed as a door to China, right? Is it changing, or is it getting more global, or vice versa? From the investor's point of view.
Okay. I have to caveat first that I haven't been super actively looking. Again, we just invested in a company in Hong Kong, but again, it's one of these situations where the customers are elsewhere. The technology they use is actually not very much used in China, but elsewhere, and etc. But other than that, I've not focused a lot on it as a market. I think like Hong Kong has had, in a way, the same dynamic as as Singapore before, where it's a hub in a certain market to some extent, and is has a certain wealth and a certain position that is different. But as a domestic market, like albeit larger than Singapore, it's still small, right? Small compared to the other Southeast Asian country, obviously small compared to China. So I think building in Hong Kong, you always have to think about like regional or global or at least country expansion. You can't build for Hong Kong itself. That's one. I think second. I know Hong Kong has always positioned itself as the gateway to China, just as Singapore says, kind of like the gateway to Asia, whatever, which I think partly is true. But I do know that like very often we've said, like, if you really want to be in China, you have to be in China, right? And you have to be in Beijing, or you have to be in Shanghai, or depending on what you do, you have to be in Shenzhen, not in Hong Kong. And I'm not sure if that's changed or not. You could argue with it looks like the influence of China on Hong Kong is getting bigger and bigger, and you could argue if they're more and more the same, then it becomes even more powerful as a gateway. But that rests on the premise that indeed it serves as a gateway. Like Edith, you're from Hong Kong, but you spend a lot of time in China. How do you see that? Like, is it successful and viable as a gateway to success in China, or do you really have to be in mainland?
If you want to go after China, go to China. Having said that, I'd like to name myself an unofficial ambassador for Hong Kong. I think that I love Hong Kong, and Hong Kong have many unicorns, and actually they do actually pick size, right? Lala Move now is a decacorn. I'm so excited about that. They raised, I don't know how much they raised, probably almost like 2 billion. In this case, I think they sort of, kind of go south, and GoGo Van, which renamed to GoGoX, go north to China. So this is logistics, and obviously do really well. And some is like different situation. Relap, which is all about landing, 40 million more now. A lot of their business is in China, so they started there, but they also like moved north. And of course, there's fintech side of things, which is Relap, like the BitMax or FTX. And then there's also SenseTime, started in Hong Kong and then moved to Beijing. So in this case, I think that Hong Kong just need to be in Hong Kong. There's no like, I love what Peter said about Singapore. It's like Delaware plus what?
Menlo Park.
And then combine. And I think in Hong Kong just Hong Kong. And tons of interesting logistic and fintech companies. But I do see people definitely either pick north or south as sort of the second headquarters. But Hong Kong really need more talent. So Valentine, you're not going anywhere. Stay in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is great, and
that's where we are.
Awesome. But yeah, I do think that if you want to go after China, really should also have offices set up in China, because the behavior is very different. So similar to, I'm sure Peter, you excited that you invested in a Hong Kong company, but I'm very sure as you go Southeast Asia, it really depends on your market focus.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
I am going to, final question. We only have 5 minutes left, and I'm going to demote you, Valentine. And then meanwhile, I already have lost my person. So give me 1 second. Okay.
I had a tough job today answering all the questions, but it seems you have the tough job managing all the folks coming in and out.
I know. I'm actually going to promote Simon first. Give me 1 second. All right. And I'm always trying to end on time. So final two.
Okay.
All right. Hey, Simon.
So I'm a university student, and I was wondering, like, from an investor's perspective, what do you think of investing in a student founder?
Gotcha. Great question. Let me give you two examples, and I hope that answers it. I had brought up Funding Society as one of the leading digital financing platforms in Southeast Asia for the first time when both folks were still in Harvard. And so I'd written up a short little memo, and we always do in our investment committee. And people loved the story, and they're like, "Wow, it's amazing! They're in the U.S., but they've raised 30 people, or sorry, hired 30 people, and they've disbursed millions of dollars already. That's amazing." But then when we got to the end of the conversation, they said, "Hold on, what does it say here? They're still in university, so they're part-time founders, and like really doing a startup is like 100%, actually 200% of your focus." And so we decided to wait, but we actually sent them a term sheet the week that they graduated from Harvard. And
I love it. Okay.
And in a similar fashion, Carousel, which I'm sure you know the founders as well, Edith, they were, I think, just done with their university, if I'm not wrong, and they were in the startup week and they hacked something together, and we ended up backing that, and that company is now whatever, $800-900 million. And so when you say student founder is like no other experience, just as a student, and towards the end of it, then fine. If it's like, oh, I still have 1 or 2 years to finish, it's a bit harder, because like the mantra, at least that I heard in that meeting from my partners, was like we prefer not to invest in part-time students. But yeah.
Yeah, so like what were the key characteristics that you saw like in the founders of Carousel, or like the ones that you've talked about in like Harvard? That's
frankly no change as to other founders. The interesting thing there is like they don't have like, oh, if you say, oh, this guy is doing a fintech company and he's worked for a bank for 10 years, you don't have that. So you have to make up for that lack of experience with what's that unique insight, what is that amazing hunger, or that absolute clarity of thought, or what are the things that you can make up or use to make up for the stuff that you don't have, which is like years of experience in a specific industry, right? But all the other traits of a founder are still the same.
So Simon, thank you for your question. We have to move to our next one, but there is hope for you. So work hard, and then you get to pitch Pieter soon.
It's amazing that you're already at this event when you're still a student and already listening in. So kudos to you.
Where have I been? All right, bye, Simon.
Hello. Hey, Edith. Hi, Peter. I've been working in telecommunications in the Philippines for 5-6 years. You mentioned a few examples of companies expanding within Southeast Asia. What are your generic insights in what those companies did well, and maybe some of the company examples as well? So jumping from one Southeast Asia market to another.
I think a lot of it even when I mentioned earlier, like invest in 10 SaaS companies, then invest in the next one. It's not just about what you've learned, but it's also what you unlearn and what you let go of. And the judgment that you can have, the choices you can make between what do you leverage and what do you don't. If you go into a new market, same thing, right? I've learned certain things that are working, but are they working in this new market? So the concept of localization to me sometimes feels like, oh, we put some veneer on it. And often that doesn't work, right? It needs to be deeper than that. You need to ask yourself some first principle questions around a market and maybe test things that you thought were that you took for granted because that's just how it is in the market that you started. And so having that much deeper understanding of the local market, and again, hiring, as Edith mentioned before, becomes super critical to hire someone that actually understands that market deeply and can operate there as a local, and can also push back to the founders or the chief product officer or whatever and say, like, you know what, you think it needs to be done in this way, but guess what? Like, here's why we've tried in a different way or do it in a different way. So I think that is the main thing. And again, some people fail, some people succeed, but try and think first principle and don't think of localization as just a small little layer of veneer, but the core stays the same. Sometimes there's things there that need changing as well.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much. Yeah.
Yes.
Good to see you. Hang in.
Yeah.
So with that, Peter, thank you so much for taking the time. And I learned a lot from our conversation, and hope you enjoy the rapid fire questions like crazy.
Yeah, it was good, man. It was fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I will see you hopefully in Singapore very, very soon. And
or in San Francisco for that matter.
Yeah, can't wait. Thank you so much,
Perfect.
guys.
Cheers. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye. Bye-bye.